So this week we announced that I would be running for Texas's 37th district. So a little bit of back history. On June 28th, what our campaign concluded was it was very highly likely that Austin, Texas would get a Democratic-leaning district, a brand new district, because Texas had been awarded 2 new districts after the 2020 census. One of those, after redistricting was complete in October, did go to Austin, Texas. It is a Democratic-leaning district, if not a solid blue district. The state is further gerrymandered, and this, pulls all of Austin together. So what was it like prior to that? So I'm going to show you a quick map. Austin is sliced up like a pizza into 6 pieces. So you can see here 6 colors here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is how Austin is sliced right now. It's gerrymandered to the extreme where they've taken small slices of Austin, Texas, and appended it with large swaths of rural land. Now, out of these 6 slices, 5 of them are represented by extreme GOP Congress members right now. And throughout the decade, between 2010 and 2020, these districts became bluer because more people moved into Austin. Over the last decade, Austin became the 11th largest city in the entire country. And over the last decade, Texas saw 95% of its growth in population to be from Hispanic, Latino, and Black and Asian Americans. That's what's happened. And Austin grew to be the 11th largest city. So you can see here how it was sliced. And now, after the redistricting, what we have is Texas's 37th district. You can see that all of these 6 pieces of Austin have been brought together into one district, creating a district with all of city of Austin in it. That's where we are. Now, why is this race so critical to Texas and all of Texas? Here's the reason why. Texas is so gerrymandered that there are no races, both at the state House level, at the state Senate level, and at the U.S. congressional level that are considered competitive, meaning that they have been cut in a way that they're either lean strongly GOP or red or Republican voters or strongly blue Democratic voters. That means there are very few chances, specifically in 2022, where a race would be competitive. There may be 1 or 2 races in the entire bag of all the different positions that you can run for in Texas. But the majority, if not almost all of them, have been predetermined whether they will have a Republican representative or a Democratic representative. So what does that mean, and where does that put us? That puts us in a position where the only way that we can reverse some of this damage that the Texas GOP and the GOP legislator of Texas have enacted on Texans is by winning statewide races. Winning statewide races is the way we take back Texas, because statewide, there's no gerrymandering. The good news here is that in 2018, when Beto O'Rourke ran for Senate, he was short just only 215,000 votes. That gap can be closed if every single Democrat in the bluest parts of Texas understands that it's a very small gap that we can all close if we want to. By winning statewide races, we now have lots of say over the Texas legislature and over the laws in Texas. We can start repealing things like Senate Bill 8. How, you ask? The governor in Texas has line item veto power. So when bills get passed in the Texas legislature, the governor can pick and choose what laws to keep and which ones to strike, number 1. Number 2, the lieutenant governor's race. If you win that, which is a statewide race, you have a lot of say over the agenda of the Texas legislature and influence over the Texas legislature and the agenda of the Texas legislature. So that is a huge opportunity. Now in 2018, the lieutenant governor in Texas only won with 51.6% of the vote. Now in Texas, you have to get over 50%, but you can see that it's a slim margin, right? 1.6% more. So that race is also very much winnable. Now you go to the AG's race, the Attorney General's race. Ken Paxton, who is our current Attorney General, was indicted in 2015. In fact, the GOP is so afraid that he may lose this job that he has multiple people, quite big names in Texas politics, primarying him, as does Abbott, by the way, Greg Abbott at the top of the ticket. Greg Abbott has Alan West, who was the GOP chairman, the GOP chair of Texas. He quit that to run, primarying him. He also has another well-known person, previously elected person, who is primarying him right now. Then we have Ken Paxton, who is being primaried by the infamous Louis Gohmert, Congressman Louis Gohmert in Congress. He's also being primaried by our current, statewide elected, nephew of George W. Bush, who is primarying him, because they're so fearful that Ken Paxton could indeed lose the race. In fact, Ken Paxton in 2018, he won the race by 0.6% of the vote. He only got 50.6% of the vote. You only need 50%, more than 50% of the vote to win in Texas. So each of these three races are very much winnable. If you win the AG's race, all of a sudden the DOJ can collaborate with the AG of Texas to come after some of these Texas without being completely overturned or fought. So there are lots of opportunities. And the good news is that based on my calculations and our campaign's calculations, there were over 100,000 Democratic votes left on the table in Austin, Texas in 2018. So what does that mean? That means Austin, Texas has some of the highest voter registration numbers in the entire country. The voter registration numbers here are upwards of 90%. Last I heard, 96, 97, 98% of voters in the Austin, Texas, Travis County, and Williamson County area, over 90% of them, if not over 95, 96, 97, 98% of them are registered voters. That's number one. So voter registration is not a barrier to voting. What is a barrier is getting Democrats out to vote. So if we can get that extra 100,000 votes out in Travis County, in Austin, Texas, we can flip these statewide races. In a midterm in 2022, what usually happens is that if you have the Democratic president, which we do, we have Joe Biden in office right now, the vote is suppressed somewhat. Many Democrats may not come out in the midterms because there's no presidential election at the top of the ticket. However, because Democrats have a trifecta in Washington, even though it is a very slim trifecta in Washington, right? The GOP has much more enthusiasm. They are much more riled up to get their voters out, which means that Republican voters are much more motivated because they have just suffered a loss, right? They lost the presidency, they don't have the House, and they don't have the Senate, right? So they have a lot more reason to come out in full force. Now, Democratic voters, there are some very reliable voters. We know the demographic 65 and over are very reliable voters. We also know that there's a set of voters that come out in every single election, no matter what. They're very dedicated. They take their civic duty very seriously. However, the Democratic Party is quote unquote the Big Ten. So you need to bring out all the other people who believe that they have been left out. We're talking about working families who today in Texas do not have health care. They don't have health insurance at all. Because remember, Texas did not expand Medicaid, so they don't have health care. They're struggling to figure out how they will afford to buy a home because they have large student loan debt. We have thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people in Austin that cannot afford to buy a home in Austin anymore. Now that it's become the 11th largest city buying a home in Austin has become impossible. The median price of a home shot up from somewhere around $250,000 in Austin to over $520,000. I saw the median home price in Austin over $527,000. That's over $500,000 in Austin, Texas. It is very difficult for young families to be able to live here. So they are thinking about what is the Democratic Party going to do for me to be able, so I can live, where I work. If you're talking about even people who are retired on a fixed income, in Texas, we don't have income taxes, but we have what's called real estate taxes. And real estate taxes are close to 3%. They're very high in Austin, Texas. So if you're on a fixed income, you are being priced out of the home that you have paid off. So let's say you purchased a home in Austin, Texas, and you've completely paid it off. But right now, the real estate taxes on that home is unaffordable on your fixed income. Maybe you were a school teacher. Maybe you were a social worker. Maybe you never made over $60,000 a year. You can't afford on that Social Security fixed income to be able to pay your taxes. Think about teachers and people who are in the bottom 50% of our country that are right now teaching in the Austin ISD, for example. They may be better off going and teaching in a different ISD instead of making, the trip for an hour or an hour and a half outside of Austin, traveling in to work here. So these are some of the big challenges that are coming up for Austin, Texas, and we must get all of these people out. If you think the people who feel disenfranchised are going to come out for a message like $15 an hour, that's not going to happen, because in Austin, you cannot live in Austin, Texas on $15 an hour. Almost all the fast food stores in Austin are already offering that, if not more, to be able to work in Austin, because it is actually impossible to live and work in Austin. We're talking about people well into their 30s that are having to live with roommates in apartments, having to share bedrooms as an adult, because the cost of living in Austin, Texas just does not make any sense. So these are some of the challenges that we are going to have to solve in order to be able to get out the vote. We need to be able to get out every single Democratic voter in Austin, Texas. The path to flipping Texas goes right through Austin. Now, why is that good news for our campaign? In 2020, when I ran for Congress, we got the highest Democratic voter turnout in the history of the district. Now, many people will say, well, we had a Democratic presidential primary, so of course you had high turnout. Okay, I'll give you that. But even in the runoff, we had, almost double the number of people come out in a runoff where there was no president at the top of the ticket than the primary from 2018. So almost double the number of people. Think about that. A 248% growth year over year, just from, runoff to runoff, but almost double from a primary to a runoff. So the highest Democratic voter turnout in the history of the district, the highest voter turnout in the history of the district. And in Williamson County, we went to over 50,000 doors, pushing Williamson County to number one in voter turnout among the top 25 counties in Texas. Now, Texas has 249 counties, so you might be like, well, you're in the top 25, but being number one in the top 25 is being number one in all of Texas, because we have many, many rural counties that have very few residents and voters. So, yes, 2020 was a monumental election, but you don't come in number one because of the top of the ticket. A lot of places had high voter turnout. We came in number one because we took our message to the voter where they were. And if we can repeat that again and get out the extra 100,000 votes to close the gap from 2018 to 2022 to help statewide Democratic nominees, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the AG, and so on. If we can help win any one of these seats, all of a sudden, we have this ability to start reversing the damage that the GOP has done to Texas.